120-89. The Cavaliers take down Maccabi Ra'anana over at the Fieldhouse for their third preseason game. 3 games down, 1 to go as we inch closer and closer to the start of the regular season. Starters didn't play in this one, but that depth of the Cavs looking pretty interesting as the regular season draws near. We talk about that, Emoni Bates, and much, much more in the latest episode of the Cavs Insider Podcast. Cavaliers win it, their third preseason game. They're 1-2 in the preseason. Tommy, the listening and viewing audience won't understand the struggle that introduction was, but we finally got through it, and I'm happy to be back with you for another episode of the Cavs Insider Podcast.
Yeah, for sure. That was a tough start to the podcast, but that's okay. That's okay. We're here.
Preseason for us too.
It is the preseason for us. We're getting into it, but yeah, it was a fun one tonight. What, like you said in the intro there, we didn't necessarily see the starters play tonight, but we did get a nice look at the Cavs bench and their depth. And I think there's a whole conversation we need to have about how deep can this team actually be, because there's a lot of pieces that, JB Bickerstaff's going to figure out what this rotation looks like. But I don't know. I'm excited to talk about their depth because I feel like it's something that we may not have talked about or given as much attention to than it probably should have so far.
Yeah, let's get into it. We can talk more at large about the depth there in a second, but I do want to mention one player in particular that could be an important piece to this depth that we're referencing, who I think is a guy that all Cavs fans are probably watching throughout this preseason. Listen, I know it's the preseason. There's not a lot you're going to take away from it. It's similar to football. Like, yeah, there's guys that sort of shine and you can take away from it what you will. But you got to understand too, like it's going against second stringers, third stringers. It's not always it's not apples to apples. So I think that's the important context of it all. But at the same time, I think all Cavs fans are watching and probably are pretty excited about what they're seeing from rookie Emoni Bates out there on the floor. He's gotten better every single night. 10 points in his first game, 12 points in his second game against Orlando, and then against Maccabi Ra'anana on Monday night, he dropped 16 points in it. He's shooting over 50% from the floor. He's shooting just under 50% from three-point range at this point as well. He is getting open looks. He's taking advantage. He looks like he's aggressive. He's asserted himself, and all I keep hearing about is how he's like this gym rat who's staying after and putting in the extra work and trying to get himself better, which is maybe contrary to what people thought about him coming out because of some of the stories about him in college and bouncing around to different schools and all these different things. But I don't know, like, did we undersell, Tommy, the potential role that he could play earlier in his career on this Cavs team and maybe actually contribute more than we thought going into this first year?
Yeah, I don't know if we undersold it because I feel like the potential's always been there, right? He was a 5-star recruit when he was, I forget how old he was when he was the 5-star recruit, but he's had that potential, he's had that talent, right? So I don't think we undersold what he can be. And like you said, it's still preseason, so once we actually see him, and we will eventually see him in an NBA game, I feel like that's when we can start saying what kind of impact he can actually have, on a day-to-day basis. But you kind of brought up two things that I want to get into with him, and both positives for sure. Number one is that, he has been incredibly aggressive, but I feel like he's been appropriately aggressive. Like, I feel like sometimes you get players that are young and trying to prove themselves, and they just start heaving shots left and right just to make some go in to get their attention from the coaching staff. But he's been taking shots, but they haven't felt like they've been out of the offense. It hasn't felt like he's been playing hero ball or anything. So I think that's been something tremendous that we've seen from him. And number two, and you brought it up too, is that, with him being as aggressive as he has been, I'm looking at the stat sheet from tonight or Monday night, and he shot the ball 12 times. He's been shooting 50% from the floor. So he's been fairly efficient with the shots he's been taking, which I think those two big things right there, being aggressive but being efficient while being aggressive, is definitely setting him up to, maybe have a larger conversation about what will his role look like coming into this year.
Yeah, and he's on that two-way contract,
Right,
which
right,
obviously gives him the ability to bounce both between the G League team, the Charge, and the major club, the major league club, the NBA club.
right.
So it gives him an opportunity to obviously see real game action in the NBA, but kind of get his feet wet and continue to grow in the G League. So I think that's obviously beneficial to him that he's on that two-way deal. But you bring up a couple points here about just how he's been efficient but aggressive, and he's kind of he's making the most of this opportunity, which is the same thing he did in the summer league. I think he was
Correct.
doing a
Yeah,
lot
for
of the
sure.
same stuff in the summer league.
Sure.
And I know again, it's similar to the preseason context of things. It's the summer league. You take it for what it is. You take it with a grain of salt. But to this point, if you're asking a player who's coming in as a second round draft pick. And I said at the time, I know we talked about it. If you're going to draft a guy in the second round, this is the type of guy you want. A guy who has a very, very high ceiling. The talent is there. He was a highly touted recruit coming out of high school. And, maybe you hit on something because the Cavs right now are a team that don't have those first round picks to utilize. So they're like, hey, we're going to get a guy with a lot of upside and a lot of high ceiling. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. It was a second round pick. No one's the wiser. But I think listen, yes, it's the preseason, it's the summer league, it's all these different things. But if you're asking a guy in the situations he's been put in so far, or in the opportunity, maybe this is a better way to put it, with the opportunities he's been given so far, if you're asking a player to make the most of it, I think it goes without saying that Emoni Bates has absolutely been making the most of his opportunities.
Absolutely.
And it's at least set him up to have some sort of impact on the season and play with the NBA club. So we'll see what it all means, but I do think you can't sell him short on that. Like he's clearly putting in the effort, and he's clearly, making the most of whatever he has in front of him right now.
Right. There's no reason why Cavs fans should not be encouraged and not be excited about what he can be in the future. Whether that's this year when he's getting legit NBA minutes, whether that might be down the line. There's a lot of reasons to be excited about what we're seeing from him so far.
Agreed. To sort of pivot the conversation a little bit, because you mentioned the depth and Emoni Bates maybe being part of that. It was interesting. JB Bickerstaff had a quote. I forget if it was when it was in the last week or so, but he made a comment about how he's really excited this year to go like 11 deep with his rotation. And I found it was interesting because we knew last year, especially when you got to the playoffs, and I get the playoffs as a different beast to some extent. Like he had a number of guys he was playing that he trusted. And that was it.
Right.
And I think in this was the whole thing with Kevin Love and why he sort of ended up getting forced out, because he just wasn't one of JB Bickerstaff's guys at some point in the season, and they decided to move on from him. So do you believe JB Bickerstaff when he says he's going to actually go 11 deep? Because I don't know, like is there the potential to do that based on what we're seeing so far? I think so.
Yeah,
is he actually going to stick to that?
I mean, I think if you look at the potential, I mean, you have your starting five: Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, Max Strus, Evan Mobley, Jared Allen. All right, your bench: Ty Jerome, Karis LeVert, Isaac Okoro, George Niang. I'm sorry. That's 9. Okay, Damian Jones. That's 10. Is D Wade going to be in that? That's 11. So, do you have the guys to do it? Absolutely. Will he actually do it? Like you said, that's the question. I could see it happening. I don't know. Those first couple of weeks, why not? Like, see what guys are going to stick, what guys are going to stand out. I don't think it's something that's going to be that he does throughout the entire season. Hopefully there's no injuries or anything, but I can't see it be something he does the entire season. But for the first couple of weeks, to see exactly what you have when you're still trying to figure that out and what you want your rotations to look like, why not do it? You're still trying to ramp guys back up. That's been a theme that he's talked about throughout preseason too. I think he could do it. I really do.
Yeah, that's something I think it's going to be interesting to monitor and certainly see. You sort of rattled off a lot of the depth pieces there. I guess just when you look at this group, and we talked about it, I know last year as well, that we thought the depth of this team was going to be really, really something that was a strength for them, and then it kind of came as it played out. It wasn't. Yeah. What's different this year that you think makes this team that encourages you about the depth of this team?
I think the biggest thing is that you know who that starting small forward is going to be. Max Strus, that's going to be your starting small forward. I mean, I know that Bickerstaff's kind of gone back and forth. Yes, he's going to be. No, he's not. I'm not going to say it just yet, but it certainly feels like that's the case.
We all know
it
what's
feels
happening
like that's
here.
the case.
Come on. Even
And
Max Strus himself said, I expect
right,
to be the
right.
starting three.
Yeah, so I think that having that solid starting small forward, knowing who it's going to be heading into the season, is the difference maker. You know, Isaac Okoro is going to be a bench piece. You know, Karis LeVert is going to be a bench piece. Not saying that's a bad thing, but I do think knowing that those two guys, knowing that you're going to have them coming off the bench in some sort of impact role, in some sort of spark plug, I think that's the difference maker. You're not trying to, one game it's Okoro, one game it's LeVert if he gets hot. I think that kind of interrupted that depth, and I think that that's kind of what messed up your second unit a little bit, because that second unit's got to have some sort of chemistry, have something to keep going with it. I just feel like they didn't have that as much last year. But now knowing that you have LeVert, knowing you have Okoro, knowing you have Jerome coming off the bench, I think that's going to be that consistency is going to help them a lot.
One thing I'm encouraged by with the depth is a kind of couple different fronts here. But first, you bring up, LeVert coming off the bench, Okoro coming off the bench. I would imagine Niang probably starts as a guy coming off the bench for most of the season. That is like, I feel really, really good about that group. Like, obviously the chemistry is important. They got to kind of develop that as the season goes on. But you got guys that are legitimate scorers, proven commodities in this league. LeVert obviously being one of them. Niang. We talked, I think, a little bit last episode about how I think the role that Isaac Okoro is going to have this year is going to suit him perfectly. Come off the bench, play defense. You can be the first guy up off the bench if we need a defensive stop or something like that as well. But he's not going to feel that pressure of, hey, I got to be that starting three, spot up shooter, knocking down threes. He can be a slasher. He can shoot threes when they're available, but that pressure's kind of off. And I think that's going to open him up to do some nice things. He's had a pretty solid preseason to this point. He had 19 points in the first game, because come back down there was a little bit in the last two, obviously they're trying some different things. But yeah, I think that next group is going to be huge in terms of, it's going to be huge in terms of having a group you feel like you can rely on. Because remember when we got to the playoffs last year, and it was like, who off the bench can you actually count on? And Karis LeVert was one of the guys, and he ended up getting inserted in the starting lineup.
Yep, and that's exactly what I'm talking about with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okoro, it was hit or miss. There were some other guys that were kind of hit or miss. Dean Wade obviously was a mess at that point in the season, so you didn't really feel like you had enough guys you could count on. I feel like with this group you actually do, and that also makes me wonder about like Ricky Rubio's status. Again, this isn't me trying to say he's got to come back,
absolutely.
Rush him. But if he does come back, the only thing maybe you could say the Cavs are really missing right now is like a true number 2 point guard. I know Ty Jerome is there, but maybe not as confident in him as a guy like Ricky Rubio, who's a veteran in this league.
Right.
Like if he comes back and can be the captain of that second unit, like, man, that second group could be really, really good. And I think the other thing I like with the depth side of this conversation is the ability for JB Bickerstaff to potentially go smaller. I don't think you're ever going to go completely small, because you're going to have to try to have Evan Mobley out there at most of the time. But if there's ever a moment where you want to pull Jared Allen, maybe you insert George Niang as your power forward, and then you have him with Mobley playing center, and you kind of conduct things that way. So that depth is going to be huge for those purposes too, in terms of making adjustments. As long as you trust JB Bickerstaff's going to make adjustments. I know there's a lot of fans out there who are weary of that.
I think you bring up an interesting point with like the depth being, you have 11 guys you can legitimately play, but that versatility I think is also going to come into play too. Like you said, they can go smaller. I still want to see a lineup something like with Niang at the 3. I don't know why. I feel like that could work out pretty well. But you have the opportunity where you could do that if you want to. So yeah, I think the depth in terms of the number of guys you have is big, but that versatility, like you brought up, is going to be big too.
We talked about the depth of the front court in particular, I know, last episode. Damian Jones, we finally have some game tape of him in the preseason to sort of go off of. Do you feel any better about that, or is that still something you feel is a big problem for this team?
I feel better. I can't say I'm totally like on board and ready to go. But I do think that Damian Jones has shown signs of being a reliable backup center, maybe not playing, 30, 40 minutes a night, obviously, but I do think he's shown that he can be serviceable in the role that the Cavs need him to be in. And JB Bickerstaff also brought up an interesting point about how they kind of use their centers, a little bit different, and and use their centers a little bit differently than other teams in the NBA, and relying on them so much to be like that defensive presence, to be that to be big on the offensive side in the paint. So I feel like we kind of have to take that into consideration too. That like he is kind of learning how the team wants him to be used. But I know I've been very critical of the front court depth, but I do think going into the season with Damian Jones still kind of learning what role he's going to have, I am a little bit more encouraged than I have been.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment right now. I do think on some level, another point we kind of talked about already in a previous episode, but the timing of the Jared Allen ankle injury, the bruise he's dealing with, and again, it's not expected that that's going to keep him out for the start of the regular season at all. But the timing of that does kind of make you live in your fears a little bit. I'm not saying it's like panic. Sure. The season's going down the tubes because Jared Allen started the season hurt or whatever. But just it's making you realize that maybe there is a need there. I have a final thought just on Georges Niang, because I tell you what, man, Donovan Mitchell talked about recruiting him and sort of trying to bring him here. They were teammates originally in Utah, and there's clearly a comfortability there between those two. But I just think Niang seems like he already is picking things up pretty quickly and is becoming a contributor for this team. He shot 50% from three in 2 of the 3 games so far. He's shooting near 40% on the floor in general through the preseason. He's missing some shots, but he's staying aggressive. He's also grabbing boards. He's also trying to assist. I know he almost had a nice sort of alley-oop pass into Tristan Thompson tonight, I saw. So he seems like he is going to be a great addition and a guy who's really able to fit in with this group and pick it up quickly. And I think that could obviously pay dividends for this team, especially out of the gate, where you're looking to hit the ground running with this group and not really miss a beat, even though there's some new pieces that kind of have to get adjusted.
Yeah, I think that when you talk about Emoni Bates and did we not maybe give him enough consideration as the impact he could have? I feel like that's been the way with Niang, for me at least. We all knew that when we signed Niang, he's a 3-point shooter. He can play the 4, front court depth a little bit, floor spacing, whatever. But I don't think, at least me, I realized what kind of effect that would have. When we were playing the Magic a couple nights ago in that preseason game, the floor spacing that he was able to create just by having his presence on the floor, I mean, that changed everything in terms of how the offense runs, because then the defense has to make sure they have a man on him. And I would say another thing with Niang is he moves so well without having the ball in his hands, so he can find those open spots behind the arc. So I'm really excited to see him, play this upcoming season, whether it be off the bench or even I'm sure he'll get some minutes with the starters as well.
Agreed. And I think the fact that he's never been throughout his career generally lower than a 40% 3-point shooter. He's a guy that can get his own shot, and I think the offensive presence is there. He's not the best defender, but I think he brings something to the table here in terms of a veteran presence that this team was lacking at times last year, especially in that playoff series with the Knicks. And I'm definitely excited to see how it all kind of comes to fruition here with him, especially being a focal point of this team in the coming weeks leading up to the season. So any final thoughts, Tommy, to get us out of here and set the tone for set the stage for the final preseason game coming up on Friday against the Pacers?
Yeah, Friday, Pacers. I feel like that's going to be dress rehearsal as much as you can do dress rehearsal with Jared Allen not in the lineup, assuming that he's not in the lineup still. But I mean, it'll be interesting. Those guys, those starters will probably play a majority of that game, at least the first half. So that'll be an exciting one to watch and get us ready for the regular season. And then, it starts from there.
That's right. Final dress rehearsal on Friday. Cavaliers will be visiting the Indiana Pacers. And then we get the real deal a week from Wednesday. Cavs on the road to start the season in Brooklyn on October 25th. They return home for actually back-to-back home games. We'll see the Pacers pretty quickly here in basically a week apart as they get the Thunder and the Pacers at home on the 27th and the 28th to kick off their home portion of their schedule. So it's getting closer, guys. We're as excited as you are, and we are certainly looking forward to covering this team all year long. Tommy, anything you're working on in particular over at CavsInsider.com?
Ooh, I'm working on an Emoni Bates story right now. So that's going to go live.
Fitting.
Yes, it is very fitting, very fitting. That'll go live early Tuesday morning. So depending on when you're listening to this or watching this, that one's already up there. But I do know we've had a ton of great other content over on the website as well. So go check that out, obviously on our YouTube channel. As we get into the season, all the different press conferences from JB Bickerstaff and behind the scenes locker room interviews with players. It's great content. I know that, it's ours and everything, but like, it's great. It's great content from a fan's perspective to have. So highly recommend you go check that out too.
Again, the website is CavsInsider.com. You can follow us on Twitter at CavsInsider_FN as well, and all over our other social media channels. Appreciate you guys jumping in with us. We'll be back with another episode. We'll shoot for maybe over the weekend, something after the preseason wraps, leading you up to that game to kick off the season against the Brooklyn Nets. Until next time, we appreciate you guys stopping on by. Head on over to CavsInsider.com. For Tommy, I'm Spencer German. Have a great day.